So today, we're going to be exploring what is really one of the most important creative achievements in cinematic history.
Absolutely.
We're talking about the 1937 film Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs.
And it's so important to remember that when this film arrived, it was just a seismic event. I mean, today it's easy to think of it as just a nostalgic fairy tale.
Right, a classic kids movie.
Exactly. But in 1937, this wasn't just another movie, it was a revolution. It fundamentally changed, the course of art, culture, and especially the business of Hollywood.
And that's really our mission today. We want to move past the Simple Brothers Grimm story and really analyze the monumental risk, both financial and professional, that was involved in making it. We're going to get into the incredible technical innovations that were basically forged under all that pressure, the very deliberate choices made in casting and art direction, and ultimately the staggering cultural and commercial echoes that are still shaping the entertainment industry almost a century later.
To really set the stage for you, we have to understand the film's, its foundational status. When it came out, it was the first animated feature film ever produced in the United States.
The very first.
And if you take that a step further, it was the first cel animated feature film in the entire world. The whole future of the Disney studio, and really the viability of feature animation as a medium, it all rested on this one film's success.
And at the heart of that story, the one that risked so much, we have our central figure, Snow White. She's a young princess, and her life is just, completely threatened by the malice of her stepmother, the Queen.
The Queen, who some of the publicity material from the 30s actually identified as Grimhild.
Right. And she was so consumed with this need to be the fairest one of all that she drives this innocent young woman into hiding.
It's a terrible situation for her.
When you really think about the immense, harrowing challenges Snow White had to face, fleeing through that terrifying forest, seeking refuge with 7 complete strangers, you have to acknowledge the sympathy her story evokes.
And that sense of peril, that immense challenge, it wasn't just confined to the princess on screen. Walt Disney himself was facing a very similar kind of professional cliff edge.
Because the industry was not on board.
Not at all. You have to remember the entire film industry was deeply, almost uniformly skeptical. The common wisdom was that a feature-length cartoon just couldn't hold an audience's attention for over an hour.
The novelty would just wear off.
Exactly. And the nickname the industry had for the project really sums it all up. They called it Disney's Folly.
Okay, so let's really unpack that historical gambit, because to understand why Walt Disney was basically forced to risk everything on this, we need to go back to the studio's early financial situation.
And his ambition. That ambition was the key driver.
Right.
In the early 1930s, the studio was a huge creative success, but financially it was frustrating for him. They were focused almost exclusively on animated shorts.
Things like the Silly Symphonies series, which were hugely popular.
Hugely popular. And they'd introduced things like the multiplane camera and vibrant color. But Disney saw this critical, unsustainable problem.
Yeah.
The shorts, as popular as they were, they just weren't profitable enough.
Not for the kind of growth he wanted.
Exactly. The cost to make a 6-minute silly symphony was going up and up because the quality demands kept increasing.
But the money coming back from distributors wasn't keeping pace.
It was static. So he saw the full-length feature as the only way forward. It was a way to command higher ticket prices, get broader distribution. But I think for him, more importantly, it was the only way to expand his storytelling.
To allow for, elaborate plots and real character development, things you just can't do in a 6-minute short.
Right. And the irony is Snow White wasn't even his first choice for this big leap. He actually cycled through several other ideas first.
Which really shows you how desperate the search was.
It does. For instance, back in 1933, he was approached about a feature that would blend animation and live action.
The Alice's Adventures in Wonderland idea.
Yes. And Disney had a history with Alice from his silent film days, but that project got scrapped because Paramount Pictures rushed their own live-action version into production.
So they beat him to the punch.
And it made his project instantly redundant, so that was out.
Then there was the plan to adapt Rip Van Winkle.
Right, Washington Irving's story. And he wanted to cast the famous humorous Will Rogers in a kind of live-action animated role.
Another ambitious project.
Very. But that one stalled too, this time because of long and ultimately fruitless negotiations with the Paramount, who held the rights and just wouldn't give them up.
And he also pitched an animated operetta, Babes in Toyland.
He did, to RKO Radio Pictures, his distributor at the time, and the RKO executives, they just rejected it outright.
Citing that same skepticism we mentioned earlier.
The exact same skepticism, the belief that audiences would never sit through a cartoon that was over an hour long.
And it's also significant that around this same time, he was offered the rights to Bambi.
Yes, Felix Salten's novel. But he turned it down for his first feature. And the reason why is so telling.
He felt the studio wasn't ready.
He felt they weren't technically equipped to handle the challenges Bambi would present. Animating realistic, anatomically correct animals and detailed natural environments was just too high a hurdle at that point in time.
So this tells us two things. He desperately needed a feature, and he was very aware of his animator's limitations. So why Snow White?
Well, it really came down to a personal conviction. We have Walt Disney's own words on this. He often said he remembered seeing a 1916 silent film version of the story when he was just a newsboy in Kansas City.
A childhood memory.
A powerful one. He said, "To me, I thought it was a perfect story." He felt it had everything: the sympathetic dwarfs, the romance between the prince and the girl, and as he put it, the heavy. That combination of comedy, romance, and melodrama felt perfectly balanced to him.
So that deep emotional certainty gave him the confidence to take this huge leap, especially after all those other projects had failed.
It did. And so Disney formally announced the film in June 1934. He intended to produce it as a feature symphony, and his initial budget estimate was $250,000.
And we really need to put that number in perspective. A budget of $250,000 was about 10 times the cost of an average silly symphony short.
Which might cost, what, $20,000 or $25,000? Hollywood moguls, people like Louis B. Mayer, they warned him he was heading into completely uncharted, very dangerous territory.
The warnings were dire. I mean, the animation historian Ward Kimball recalled that the entire film industry was unanimous.
They all agreed.
6 or 7 minutes of a cartoon was fine, but an hour and a half, no way. They genuinely thought audiences would get bored, that the novelty would wear off.
Some critics even warned that the bright Technicolor would hurt people's eyes.
Hurt their eyes, and cause them to walk out of the theater.
It was an existential threat to the whole studio, but Disney pushed ahead, driven by his vision and, that financial necessity. But the reality of production soon went way beyond those initial estimates.
And we have to underline the sheer scale of this financial commitment. The final production cost wasn't $250,000. It ballooned to a staggering $1,488,422.74.
To really grasp what that number meant in 1937, you have to understand this is an amount that rivaled or even surpassed the budgets of major live-action historical epics of the time.
It was an insane amount of money for any film, let alone a cartoon.
Right. Every extra dollar spent just dug the hole deeper, which led to that intense personal risk for him.
That personal stake was just immense. The studio was constantly in debt, borrowing against future profits from shorts that were barely breaking even.
And when the film went so far over budget, Walt Disney took the drastic step of mortgaging his own house.
His house in the Los Feliz neighborhood of Los Angeles, just to help finance the last stages of production. He was literally betting his family's home on this film.
Which shows you the level of panic, but also his overwhelming conviction. And even that wasn't enough. The most critical moment came midway through when he desperately needed another loan.
An additional $250,000 just to finish the animation and post-production.
And this must have been a terrifying meeting. He took a rough, unpolished, incomplete cut of the film, just pencil tests and story reels, to Joseph Rosenberg,
The vice president of Bank of America. A famously impassive, analytical guy.
Very cold, very by the book. He watched all the footage in total silence. And when it was over, Disney, who'd mortgaged his house and risked his whole company, just waited for the verdict.
And Rosenberg just turned to him and said, "Walt, that thing is going to make a hat full of money."
Just like that. And he approved the loan. That one moment, based entirely on the raw, incomplete emotional power of an animated piece, was absolutely crucial.
It saved the entire project from collapsing.
And by ensuring the film could be completed, it really allowed the golden age of animation to even begin. Without that rough cut convincing Rosenberg, the entire history of cinema would look dramatically different.
So this enormous financial risk was, of course, paired with an equally intense period of creative and technical innovation. The pressure to justify that nearly $1.5 million budget really forced the studio to invent new processes.
Especially in how they developed and refined the story.
Let's start with the biggest challenge. The Dwarfs. Walt Disney saw the 7 dwarfs as the strongest lure of the whole story.
Right, because of their comedic potential. His mandate was firm: Each one had to have a distinct individual personality and a name to match.
Moving beyond those, generic, interchangeable figures you'd see in the older stage and silent film versions.
And the initial creative freedom in developing them was huge, which led to this almost chaotic brainstorming process. The studio came up with a pool of over 50 possible names.
And some of the rejected names are pretty wild. It gives you a sense of the struggle to find the right mix.
They considered names like Awful, Big O Ego, Hickey, Sniffy, Stuffy, Shorty, Tubby, Dizzy, and Burpy.
Burpy.
It took a huge amount of effort to finally settle on the 7 that we know, which perfectly encapsulate that range of human personality. Duck, grumpy, happy, sleepy, bashful, sneezy, and dopey.
Now, while the Dwarfs were first seen as this comedic engine, a really critical and expensive shift happened during development.
A major shift in the narrative structure.
It was decided that for the film to have the dramatic weight to hold an audience for 83 minutes, the story had to pivot. It had to center more on the relationship between Snow White and the villainous queen.
And this pivot meant sacrificing sequences that were purely comedic or just focused on the dwarf's home life. And these were not minor cuts.
No, some of these scenes were fully animated,
representing huge investments of time and money, especially from the younger, up-and-coming animators.
Can you give an example of a sequence that was cut?
Sure. There was a detailed sequence that showed Doc and Grumpy getting into a huge argument over whether Snow White should even be allowed to stay with them.
Reflecting that tension over their new domestic situation.
Exactly. And another famous one, which was one of the most painful cuts for the animators, showed Snow White trying and failing to teach the dwarfs how to eat soup like gentlemen.
Which involved a lot of slapstick.
A lot of slapstick. And I recall reading about the animator Ward Kimball, who was assigned both of those sequences. The removal of that soup-eating scene and an elaborate bed-building scene was so discouraging for him
That he almost quit the studio.
he seriously considered leaving entirely. Disney had to personally persuade Kimball to stay, recognizing his genius despite the cuts, and he promoted him to supervising animator for Jiminy Cricket in Pinocchio.
So a huge promotion to keep him there. It really highlights how brutal that editing process must have been.
It does. But let's go back to the Dwarfs, specifically Dopey. His characterization turned out to be the most surprising and really the most successful.
And interestingly, he was a relatively late addition, right? He first showed up in a story outline in November 1934.
That's right. And initially, he was supposed to be very talkative, kind of the group's simpleton figure. But the studio struggled intensely to find the right voice actor.
They needed someone who could deliver simple, comedic lines without sounding too infantile or too stereotyped.
They even tried out the legendary Mel Blanc years before he joined Warner Bros. But it didn't work.
So it's a classic case of a limitation leading to a stroke of genius.
Exactly. Because they couldn't find the perfect voice, they made the creative decision to make Dopey mute. He would rely entirely on physical comedy and pantomime.
And his nonverbal sounds were provided by the actor Eddie Collins.
Right. And that forced reliance on pure visual storytelling is precisely why Dopey is so often cited as the most expressive and emotionally effective of all the dwarfs.
That precision in casting also extended to Snow White herself. Disney was looking for a very specific, almost ethereal quality in her voice.
Adrianna Hutto was actually the first actress to audition for the role way back in September 1934. But Disney then spent an entire year auditioning about 150 other people.
He famously rejected established talents like the very popular teenage soprano Deanna Durbin.
Specifically because he felt her voice sounded too mature, too operatic. He was searching for a voice that sounded, as he put it, kind of away from every day.
Something that captured the innocent quality of a 14-year-old girl, even though Hutto herself was actually 18 at the time.
And when he finally came back to her, it was because she had that unique, vibrato-heavy, almost childlike soprano quality that just transported you.
And the contract details are just astonishing in hindsight.
They are.
She was called in for 44 days of recording sessions over 2 years, and she was paid a flat rate. Her total payment was $970.
$970. And she was also reportedly forbidden from discussing her work on the film or appearing in public roles after, so Disney could maintain the illusion that Snow White was this unique, disembodied voice.
For the main villain, they cast Lucille Laverne, who was a noted stage actress known for these very dramatic, powerful roles.
And she voiced both the beautiful, cruel queen and her terrifying crone disguise, the witch.
And there's that great story about how she adapted her voice. The animators initially found her natural voice too smooth for the cackling, menacing witch.
That's right. So Laverne, showing incredible dedication to the part, had a very simple solution. She took out her false teeth
Just remove them.
to provide that rougher, harsher, and much more menacing voice for the crone. It ensured the transformation was vocal as well as visual. And tragically, this turned out to be her final film performance.
We also see some casting that was driven purely by a gimmick, which speaks to that need for distinct personalities among the dwarfs.
Like Roy Atwell, who played Doc. His defining characteristic was his use of malapropisms, the accidental misuse of words for comedic effect.
And then there's Billy Gilbert.
Right. He was already famous for his signature theatrical sneeze. Gilbert read about the casting in a Variety article called Disney to Audition and was basically hired on the spot.
After demonstrating his sneezing routine.
That was all he needed. It fit the character of Sneezy perfectly.
So while casting was so important, maybe the most profound innovation was in the animation process itself, which had to be completely redefined for this feature.
Until this point, most animators working on shorts were former newspaper cartoonists. They were brilliant at quick, punchy caricatures, but they often lacked formal artistic training in anatomy or realistic movement.
And Disney realized that for the emotional weight of a feature to work, especially with human characters like Snow White and the Prince, the animation had to look grounded in reality.
So, to prepare for this huge technical leap, Disney mandated these unprecedented internal art classes for his entire staff. They became mandatory for all artists and animators.
These classes were intensive. They were run by instructors like Don Graham and Philip L. Dyke, starting as early as 1932, and they focused on fundamental artistic principles.
Things like human and animal anatomy, action analysis, movement mechanics, and acting. The goal was to move past simple cartooning.
Graham taught them how to simplify complex three-dimensional forms into basic shapes, how to cut out unnecessary details, and critically, how to make a drawing look solid.
Focusing on tiny details, like the tension points in a bent knee, or the subtle shift in weight when a character takes a breath. This instruction just fundamentally elevated the skill level of the entire studio.
Disney's internal philosophy was that you couldn't animate the fantastic or the magical unless you first know the real.
And that formal training, it professionalized animation. It turned it from a simple trade into an art form based on classical foundations.
To get that striking atmospheric look, Disney also brought in major European artistic direction, moving far beyond the typical American cartoon style.
Artists like Albert Herder were pivotal. He was a Swiss artist responsible for supervising the art direction and creating the overall Germanic visual look, pulling from European fairy tale illustrations.
He was joined by Gustav Tenggren, a Swedish illustrator who specialized in color styling. He determined the staging, the shadows, and the atmosphere of many scenes.
Tenggren's style borrowed directly from renowned European illustrators of folklore like Arthur Rackham and John Bower to get that dark, rich, detailed storybook quality that Disney wanted.
And speaking of dark atmosphere, the film's visual language intentionally drew from a much darker cinematic well.
Disney strongly encouraged his staff to study European silent cinema, specifically German expressionist films.
Which is an incredible detail. You're connecting a Disney cartoon to films like Nosferatu from 1922 and The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari from 1920. How did that show up in the design?
It showed up in the use of extreme shadows, unnatural angles, distorted perspectives, all to convey psychological distress and danger. You see it most starkly in the darker sequences.
Like Snow White's flight through the forest.
Exactly, where the trees turn into clawed monsters and, of course, the queen's gruesome transformation into the witch.
That transformation sequence must have required some very specific references.
It did. It was explicitly inspired by contemporary live-action horror films. Disney made specific reference in story meetings to the 1931 film Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde.
So he was using the visual cues of the horror genre to maximize the terror of that scene.
Precisely. But even with all this training and reference material, animating realistic humans proved to be exceptionally difficult.
Animators like Grim Natwick, who is famous for creating the very energetic Betty Boop, was tasked with Snow White herself.
To combat that stiffness and unnatural movement that plagued earlier human animation, they used extensive live-action reference footage.
So actors were filmed performing the scenes, and then that film was projected onto the animation desk.
Allowing the artist to trace the outlines of movement, That practice, known as rotoscoping, was essential for credible human movement, but it was also a technical nightmare for the animators. Many of them found it tedious and creatively restrictive.
And the difficulty didn't end there. Once the animation was drawn on the cells, the ink and paint department faced its own unique, labor-intensive challenges.
Specifically, they found it extremely difficult to add color, especially a healthy, natural blush, to Snow White's and the Queen's faces without it looking flat and harsh.
So if painting it on looked flat, what was the solution? This is where the technical detail of the production is just incredible.
It's astonishing. They couldn't get that delicate, translucent glow of a natural complexion with standard paint. The solution they came up with was to use a specific red dye.
And this dye was applied using a small piece of cotton wrapped around the tip of a pencil or a stick.
And it had to be painstakingly applied by hand onto each individual cell for every single frame that Snow White and the Queen appeared in.
Wait, so with 24 frames per second, they were manually adding blush, frame by frame, to potentially hundreds of thousands of drawings. That level of manual labor must have been agonizingly slow.
And incredibly expensive. It was precisely that. This technique, born purely out of necessity to get that desired realism, proved so time-consuming and demanding that it was essentially abandoned right after Snow White wrapped.
A one-time solution.
A one-time technical solution that proves just how committed they were and how high the financial stakes were to achieving that human believability.
The scale of that production risk and the technical innovation are just undeniable. But of course, none of it would have mattered if the final film failed to connect with an audience.
But fortunately for Walt Disney, the release was nothing short of a stunning triumph that completely shocked the industry.
It was a spectacular success, right from the premiere, which was at the Carquet Circle Theater in Los Angeles on December 21st, 1937.
And the audience that night was filled with some of the biggest stars in Hollywood. People like Judy Garland, Marlene Dietrich, and Charles Laughton were all there.
And the reaction must have been immediate validation for Disney after all that mockery.
It was total validation. The audience gave the film a standing ovation when it ended, immediately signaling that Disney had done what everyone said was impossible.
He sustained emotional investment in a feature-length cartoon.
The cultural impact started instantly. Less than a week after the premiere, Walt Disney and the Seven Dwarfs were on the cover of Time magazine.
And shortly after that, it opened in New York at Radio City Music Hall, and the strong box office there convinced RKO to push it into general release on February 4th, 1938.
And that's where we see the financial vindication. Snow White became an absolute commercial juggernaut. Against that staggering $1.5 million cost, the film earned over $8 million internationally in its initial run.
That's a return that fundamentally changed the studio's entire trajectory. It became the highest-grossing film of 1938, but critically, it briefly held the record for the highest-grossing sound film of all time.
And to appreciate that record, you have to understand, it displaced Al Jolson's 1928 film The Singing Fool, which had held that title for nearly a decade.
So Snow White proved that animation wasn't just some niche product. It could compete directly with the biggest live-action films.
It could. It was only later displaced by the even bigger success of Gone with the Wind in 1939.
But the financial power of this film is only compounded over time through all the re-releases. We have to stress the enduring financial supremacy here.
Yeah.
Adjusted for inflation, Snow White remains one of the top 10 American film moneymakers of all time.
That is an extraordinary achievement. When you adjust it, it remains the highest-grossing animated film ever, with an estimated adjusted gross of $2,297 million.
$2.297 billion.
That figure puts it in the same legendary financial company as films like Avatar and Titanic. It just proves its perennial drawing power across generations.
And the critical reception matched that box office enthusiasm. Contemporary reviewers were highly impressed, and they specifically praised the realistic animation of the human characters, the very thing the team struggled so hard to get right.
Some critics noted that the illusion was so perfect that audiences quickly forgot they were watching animated figures. The Los Angeles Times wrote that the film achieves a new kind of beauty and hailed Disney as a true cinematic artist.
And the New York Times gave it one of the highest compliments, calling it a classic, as importantly cinematically as The Birth of a Nation or The Birth of Mickey Mouse.
And Variety, the industry publication that had been so skeptical, they reversed course entirely. They said the film approaches real greatness.
Which was a huge admission that the cartoon medium could handle serious emotion.
The admiration even extended to the most revered filmmakers of the time. The legendary Russian director Sergei Eisenstein called Snow White the greatest film ever made.
And Charlie Chaplin, arguably the most important silent film artist in history, also publicly praised the achievement.
The ripple effect was immediate and competitive. The film's success inspired other major studios to invest heavily in fantasy and animation. Most notably, the massive financial returns directly inspired MGM
to rush into production on its own ambitious fantasy film, The Wizard of Oz, which came out just 2 years later in 1939.
The film's achievement was also formally recognized by the Academy. Although it was nominated for Best Musical Score, the Academy went a step further the next year and created a very special, unique honorary award for Walt Disney.
Can you describe the significance of that award?
Well, it recognized Snow White as a significant screen innovation which has charmed millions and pioneered a great new entertainment field. And the trophy itself was a physical representation of the film.
One full-size Oscar statuette,
accompanied by 7 perfectly crafted miniature statuettes for Snow White and the 7 Dwarfs.
And that legendary award was presented to Disney by a 10-year-old Shirley Temple, which just cemented the moment in Hollywood history.
We also can't overlook the musical legacy. The original score has iconic songs like Hey Ho and Whistle While You Work.
But the true musical testament to the film's artistic quality is Someday My Prince Will Come. That song profoundly transcended the film's medium and genre.
It did. It became a recognized and highly influential jazz standard. Its complex but beautiful melodic line has made it a favorite for improvisation.
It's been recorded and performed by so many prominent jazz musicians.
Giants like Miles Davis, Oscar Peterson, Bud Powell, Buddy Rich, Lee Wiley. That transformation from a cartoon song to an enduring piece of the jazz repertoire is just a powerful testament to the quality of the music that came out of that studio.
The success of Snow White didn't just win Disney awards and fill theaters. The sheer scale of the profits literally provided the capital to build a physical entertainment empire.
That's the key analytical point. The film was the financial engine. Disney used those massive profits to finance the construction of the brand new, massive $4.5 million studio complex in Burbank.
The same site where the Walt Disney Studio stands today. Snow White paid for the foundation of the modern corporation.
And this new facility had better animation stages, state-of-the-art sound stages, and, crucially, climate-controlled storage for all the precious cells and films. This financial stability immediately accelerated their feature production pipeline.
The momentum was staggering. Within just 2 years of the premiere, they completed 2 more highly ambitious, complex features.
Pinocchio and Fantasia.
And then Dumbo and Bambi followed soon after. This rapid succession proved that the animated feature was now a legitimate, enduring, and critically essential form of entertainment.
And the revenue stream went far beyond the box office and future films. Snow White launched the modern entertainment merchandising business as we know it.
The monetization of intellectual property really started here. In its early years, the sale of Snow White-themed merchandise, things like dolls, hats, garden seeds, glassware, generated an unprecedented $8 million in sales.
$8 million in the late 1930s is an enormous sum. Adjusted for inflation, that early merchandising success alone is equivalent to over $100 million today. It provided the definitive blueprint for how studios could leverage characters and IP beyond the movie theater.
And given its revolutionary impact, Snow White is consistently listed among the highest industry accolades. In 1989, it was one of the first 25 films selected for preservation in the National Film Registry.
For being culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant, a permanent historical designation.
The American Film Institute has also given it enormous recognition. They ranked it among the 100 greatest American films, but more specifically, they named it the #1 animated film of all time.
And the film's villain, the Evil Queen, was recognized as the number 10 villain in cinema history.
And reinforcing the film's musical depth, Someday My Prince Will Come was ranked number 19 on the AFI's list of 100 great movie songs.
On a more personal note, the character of Snow White holds a unique distinction. She was inducted into the Hollywood Walk of Fame in 1987.
Which makes her the only Disney princess to achieve that lasting distinction.
Beyond its artistic merits, the film has also served as a technological milestone for preservation and restoration.
Because of its foundational importance, it was chosen for a radical restoration project in the 1990s.
And this was groundbreaking work. In 1993, for its re-release, Snow White became the very first film to be entirely scanned into digital files.
This allowed technicians to digitally manipulate the image, remove dirt and scratches and damage, and then record that clean file back onto film stock.
And the entire restoration was done at a very high standard of 4K resolution, which shows the industry's commitment to preserving this specific artifact. That process really set the standard for digital film restoration for decades.
Its performance on home media has been equally groundbreaking. When it was released on VHS in 1994, it inaugurated the hugely successful Walt Disney Masterpiece Collection.
Then, in 2001, on DVD, it was the first of the Platinum Edition DVDs, and it sold a record-breaking 1 million copies in just 24 hours.
The enduring commercial power is just so clear. By 2001, the film's combined box office and home video revenue had reached an incredible $1.1 billion.
And to ensure the film's quality endures for new high-definition viewing, a new 4K restoration was produced in 2023 for Disney's 100th anniversary.
Which required scanning the original 35mm Technicolor negative to capture the original colors and detail with perfect fidelity.
This commitment means that Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs holds the distinction of being the oldest feature-length animated film to be released in the 4K format.
And of course, the story continues to live on in multiple highly profitable forms across the Disney empire. The theme parks have had Snow White attractions since Disneyland first opened in 1955.
Snow White's Enchanted Wish was an opening day attraction.
And reflecting the continued importance of the Dwarfs, the Seven Dwarfs Mine Train roller coaster is a major fixture at the Magic Kingdom today, ensuring these characters remain central to the modern park experience.
They also continue to appear across various media, from the Kingdom Hearts video games to cameos in live-action films like Gremlins, and even Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness.
And this legacy is now set to continue with the highly anticipated 2025 live-action adaptation. The film is directed by Mark Webb and stars Rachel Zegler as Snow White and Gal Gadot as the Evil Queen.
And it's interesting to note the creative forces attached to this new version. The script got rewrites from the acclaimed filmmaker Greta Gerwig,
which suggests a desire to reinterpret and re-examine the source material for contemporary audiences while still retaining the core story.
And we also found a fascinating piece of development history about a project that never happened. In the early 2200s, Disney Toon Studios was developing a computer-animated prequel called The Seven Dwarfs.
Right. And the plot of that canceled project was going to center on the Dwarfs' history. It even sought to explain Dopey's muteness, not as a casting issue, but as a deep narrative trauma.
What was the specific story they were developing?
The script explored how Dopey lost his voice after witnessing the death of his mother. That project, which would have been a significant departure in tone, was eventually canceled by John Lasseter after Disney bought Pixar and consolidated its animation strategy.
So if we look back across the scale of this whole exploration, what becomes abundantly clear is that Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs was so much more than a simple fairy tale adaptation. It was a staggering financial risk that nearly bankrupted its creator.
Right. It was a catalyst for industrial expansion, an engine for artistic and technological innovation that pushed the entire medium of animation forward decades ahead of schedule.
Precisely. Its monumental commercial success, which is reaffirmed by its status as a top box office performer when adjusted for inflation, it didn't just save Walt Disney's studio and pay for the new Burbank lot.
It established the animated feature film as a legitimate, artistically significant, and enduring form of entertainment, capable of holding audiences, commanding high critical praise, and generating billions in revenue that are still flowing almost 90 years later.
So, as you reflect on this film's foundational role in cinema, consider the inherent tension at the heart of its creation. Walt Disney and his artists, they pushed relentlessly for technical realism. They invested millions in anatomy classes, in rotoscoping, in painstaking frame-by-frame coloring techniques.
All with the express purpose of making the fantastical world, and especially the human characters, look absolutely real.
Yet at the end of the day, what cemented the film's enduring greatness and its universal appeal wasn't the photorealism of the prince or the queen.
No, it was the emotional sincerity of the story, especially that universally relatable, simple bond that develops between the kind, afflicted princess and her 7 sympathetic, hand-drawn little men. The film's lasting genius lies in how that ambition for groundbreaking technology was deployed perfectly in the service of the most fundamental and affecting human, or rather, small man, emotion.
Thanks for listening.